Today, I will be discussing why the COVID 19 pandemic acted as the next 9/11. But before I dive into this, I will basically be giving a backstory on 9/11. 9/11 was one of the biggest mysteries in the world. No matter where you were at in the world, whether you lived in France or Australia, it was broadcast all over. When 9/11 occurred, I was a young kid in the Ivory Coast, and I don't remember it being broadcasted as much over there, but it wasn't until that I got here and I had to adjust to the culture and understand the language that 9/11 was one of the worst terrorist attacks to have happened on American soil. And I think at the time I was either in fifth grade or sometime in middle school. So, what do we know of what happened on this day? We know that 19 Al Qaeda terrorist group members hijacked four planes. Two of those planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, killing about 2,977 people, including firefighter correspondents. The third plane crashed into the west side of the Pentagon, killing 184 people. And the fourth plane crashed in a rural area in Pennsylvania where crew members and passengers fought off the terrorist group members, but eventually all 40 members on board died. So this was indeed a mystery. It's one that a lot of people still have questions on. Essentially, what led to this? How did this happen? Especially in one of the biggest countries in the world, including the United States of America. The United States, no matter how much is falling, still ranks number one in the world. You wouldn't think that it could happen here in the US, but it did. To me, I believe that 9/11 was a false flag attack or an inside job. What is a false flag attack? A false flag attack is a planned or orchestrated event where the intentions are disguised to where the people responsible behind the attack are disguised. The responsibility is blamed on another group. Do I believe that 9/11 was a false flag attack or an inside job? Yes, I do. And there are various factors as to why I could present that claim. The first factor as to why I believe 9/11 acted as a false flag attack is with the demolition of the World Trade Center 7. So, the World Trade Center 7 was a building that collapsed on its own with no direct impact of airplanes. So, back in the day, you were able to see, especially on YouTube, videos of this building collapsing on its own. Nowadays, you go to YouTube, you won't find access to those videos because all those were pieces of evidence that were taken down. So basically, I believe the World Trade Center 7 was a building that was meant to be hit by a plane, but since it crumbled on its own, it leads many to believe that there were explosives inside the building. The second factor as to why I believe that 9/11 acted as a false flag attack is because of the purpose of the FBI and the CIA. These are the two most important agencies in the United States meant to protecting the American people. The FBI collects information from people who reside in the United States, whereas the CIA is an agency that collects information about foreign countries and the citizens of those foreign countries. So, two agencies from the United States, one works with one works on domestic affairs, one works on international affairs. How could have two agencies failed to come through on a massive attack such as 9/11? That's a big mystery right there because these are the two most important agencies in the United States meant to protect the American people. One at the domestic level, meaning inside the United States, one at the international level, meaning we're going to take a look at countries and the citizens of those countries that act as a threat to the American people. If those two agencies fail to come through on 9/11, that leads to a lot of question marks. The third factor as to why I feel like 9/11 acted as a false flag attack is through a group called Architects and Engineering for 9/11. So essentially, this is a group that consists of 3,000 architects and engineers. This group wants the federal government to do a real investigation into what really happened on 9/11. Why do they want a real investigation? This goes back to the way that the twin towers of the World Trade Center was designed. So the initial planning of the twin towers of the World Trade Center began in the late 1960s, and it was concluded in 1973, I believe. When the planning began for the World Trade Center, it was planned for the purpose of withstanding 150-mile-per-hour hurricane winds. It was meant to withstand earthquakes, and it was meant to withstand fires. So let me remind you that these are architects and engineers. So they know a lot about their field. Anything involving constructing, engineering, this is their field. They believe that the Twin Towers shouldn't have collapsed the way it did, even though two planes hit the buildings. And initially, like I said, the buildings were constructed to withstand the worst of the worst. They were meant to withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and things such as fires. So for the buildings to have came down the way they did, it leads many to believe that there were explosives inside the building. And when there were direct impacts from the two airplanes and the jet fuel combined with the explosions led to the Twin Towers colliding. So you got engineers and architects who feel like ain't no way these buildings should have came down on their own. So there you have that. So the fourth factor as to why 9/11 acted as a false flag attack is due to a woman called Beverly. And this lady, she was a widow whose husband died on 9/11. And ever since her husband died, she was a tireless advocate for other people, families who lost loved ones on that day. She founded a group called Voices for September 11. And at the time, she met with then President Barack Obama to discuss preventing future domestic terrorist attacks on American soil. A week after meeting with then President Obama, she died in a plane crash near Buffalo, New York. Her and 49 other people. So ultimately, 50 people altogether. So let me get this straight. Her husband dies in 9/11. She becomes an advocate for people who lost loved ones due to 9/11. And then she meets up with Obama and then loses her life in an incident similar to how her husband lost her life a week after meeting up with Obama. So I don't know about you guys, but that just doesn't sit right with me. A fifth factor as to why I believe 9/11 acted as a false flag attack is due to the War on Terror. This was a US led counterterrorism campaign to the US responding to the 9/11 attacks, where they felt the need to go to the Middle East, specifically the countries of Afghanistan and Iraq. They felt the need to go to these countries and topple the governments, weed out the terrorists, and eradicate the weapons of mass destruction. So this is what the media told us that the US went into these countries for. But me personally, I believe that the US went there for the purpose of having a military base there and for the purpose of exploring the natural resources in these countries. So by having a military base in these countries, you have a voice, you have say, you have power on what goes down, on what on the the possibilities that can go down in these countries. So it acts as a form of colonialism. You could control the natural resources in these countries. So what do these countries have to offer? Stan, which is a country that the US went to as an aftermath of 9/11, it produces 90% of the world's opium, which is used to make heroin. And on top of having opium, it has oil. And Iraq, it ranks fifth in the world's oil reserves. So it doesn't take a genius or a scientist to understand that 9/11 was used or devised as a way to go into these countries, as a way to just set up military bases, as a way to get up on these countries' natural resources. Let's go after their oil, and let's go after their opium, and let's go after other things that it can be that these countries could have that could benefit us at home. Like I said, if you have a military base, that acts as a form of colonialism. Through colonialism, you could directly and indirectly impact the natural resources. And a sixth factor is to why I feel like the US branded 9/11 for what they did, even though it acted as a false flag attack or inside job, is there are various countries in the Middle East. It don't matter where you go in the US. There are seven continents in the world. It don't matter. There's gonna be superpowers in those seven continents. Went to Afghanistan and Iraq. We went to low and unstable and weak countries in the Middle East as a way to bully them and conquer. Again, as a form of colonialism and get access to the natural resources, as a way to show to the world that we are the number one superpower. The US definitely couldn't have done that with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Why? Because those countries are the China and Russia of the Middle East. If we're going to go to another region of the world, let's bully the weak regions and set the tone so that the rest of the world can know that we're still number. They couldn't have done it with Saudi Arabia and Iran. You know why? If the US would have done that, it would have led to a full scale war. So they knew which countries to bully and they knew which countries to not mess with. And before I discuss why the COVID-19 pandemic acted as the next 9/11, I guess I wanted to give a backstory on 9/11 and the mysteries behind 9/11 and why it just acted as a facade to citizens in the United States and to citizens outside the US. I'm a foreigner and I'm here in the US already knowing that 9/11 is not what it perceived to be. So there you have it. To conclude, 9/11 acts among the world's biggest mysteries of the world. No matter how much the media may try to tell us this is what happened, these are the number of people that died, this was the group and the countries involved, it just seemed too bogus to me. And this is information coming from someone that's not born. So it's just, you could tell that was a facade that the government tried to hide from what really happened. There were certain participants that were part of the government that had access, that had a say into what was really gonna happen that day. And when it happened, it was just a bunch of patching up. The truth, let's be honest. 9/11 ranks among the world's biggest mysteries. Is up there with what's really in Antarctica, how the Mayans disappeared, how the pyramids got built, the stone hedges in the UK, it what's in the Bermuda Triangle and how ships mysteriously disappear. 9/11 ranks up there. So it's like the resources, the tools may indicate that this is what happened, but this is something that people are always going to have mixed feelings. Again, I described a lady who husband lost her life. She meets up with the president at the time, describe how to prevent future terrorist attacks, and she dies in a similar fashion as her husband. So these are just, it's like, anything to try to prevent people from knowing the truth, which is going to shut them up. And I think that's what this lady, Beverly Urquhart, I think that's what she was trying to do. So again, mystery, despite no matter how much people out there may try to shut down what really happened, I think the people that are aware and woke, we will never forget certain clues that lead us to knowing the truth indeed.